The gunfire did not last forever, but it lasted long enough to erase whatever fragile illusion of distance I had been holding onto. Because even behind reinforced concrete and biometric locks, the sound of violence travels differently when you know it is connected to you. And when the final echo faded into a tense mechanical silence broken only by the low hum of ventilation systems and distant radio chatter from Adrian's security team, I realized I had crossed an invisible line that separated ordinary fear from irreversible involvement. Adrian did not rush back upstairs immediately, and instead he stood in front of the surveillance wall with the composure of someone who had anticipated escalation, issuing instructions in a calm, controlled tone, redirecting perimeter units, confirming casualties with clinical efficiency. And I watched him carefully, searching for rage or recklessness, finding neither, because whatever storm existed inside him was contained beneath layers of discipline that had likely been carved into him long before his father died. "They're pulling back," he said, after several minutes, eyes still on the monitors. "Will they come back?" I asked quietly. "Yes." There was no hesitation. "Because of me." "Because you are proof," he corrected, finally turning toward me, and for the first time since the attack began, the tension in his shoulders seemed less about external threat and more about internal calculation. "Proof of what?" I pressed. "That my father's death was engineered," he said, stepping closer, not invading my space, his voice lowering as though the walls themselves were capable of betrayal, and that the rerouted blood supply was not incompetence but instruction. "And your uncle," I said, the word tasting bitter now that it carried weight. "Yes." The silence that followed was different from previous silences between us because it was no longer built on suspicion, but on alignment, the realization settling between us that we were standing on the same side of something larger than either of us had chosen. We returned upstairs, on security-confirmed containment, and the mansion no longer felt like sterile luxury, but like a battlefield disguised in marble and glass. Subtle cracks visible along outer stone panels, where explosives had tested the perimeter, staff moving quietly to restore order, and Adrian walking through it all with a presence that did not demand attention yet commanded it effortlessly. Men twice my size stepping aside without question as he passed. In his private office, a space dominated by floor-to-ceiling windows and a massive digital display table projecting financial maps and territorial grids, he poured himself a glass of water instead of alcohol, which struck me as deliberate restraint, and gestured for me to sit across from him. "You can still leave," he said without preamble. I stared at him, almost laughing at the absurdity. "Leave to where?" "I can relocate you somewhere they cannot reach." "You said that before." I meant it. His eyes held mine steadily, and I understood then that this was not manipulation, not emotional leverage, but genuine calculation of risk. "If I go," I said slowly, "they will assume I'm still alive." "Yes, and if I stay, they will come directly." The honesty and his answer settled heavily between us. "You're asking me to choose my method of danger," I said. "I'm offering you autonomy." That word lingered because autonomy was the one thing I had lost the night he took me, and yet here he was placing it back on the table with unsettling sincerity. "And what about you?" I asked. "What about me? If I leave, what happens?" He did not answer immediately, and for a fraction of a second the composed exterior slit just enough for me to see the truth underneath. "They will interpret it as weakness," he said finally, "and accelerate internal consolidation, meaning my uncle will not wait for another opportunity. And if I stay, I end it." There it was, not shouted, not dramatized, just spoken plainly. "You would start a war. I would finish one." The weight of that statement pressed against my ribs, because despite everything I had seen, everything I had learned in the past 48 hours, I still wanted to believe there was an alternative that did not involve blood. "Your father," I said quietly, "worked to stabilize your network before he died, didn't he?" A flicker of surprise crossed his face at my shift in topic. "Yes, he funded clinics," I continued, recalling fragments from archived news I had skimmed years ago. "He reduced street conflict." Adrian's gaze sharpened, not defensive but attentive. "He understood sustainability," he said. "Then honor that," I said, leaning forward despite myself, feeling something stronger than fear pushing the words out of me. "Don't let his legacy collapse into retaliation." For a long moment he said nothing, and in that silence I realized I was no longer speaking as a hostage bargaining for safety, but as a man who had seen grief twist into something corrosive and did not want to watch it happen again. "You think restraint will save us," he said quietly. "I think clarity will." Another pause, heavier this time, And then a subtle shift occurred in the room when the office doors opened without warning and a familiar face stepped inside, flanked by two armed men who did not look aligned with Adrian's security detail. His uncle was older but impeccably dressed, modern suit cut sharp and expensive, hair silver at the temples in a way that looked curated rather than aged, and his smile was the kind that never reached the eyes. "So this is the nurse," he said smoothly, gaze sliding over me with thinly veiled disdain. "The inconvenience that refuses to disappear." Adrian stood slowly, posture relaxed but alert, placing himself subtly between us, without making it obvious. "You bypassed perimeter clearance," Adrian said calmly. "I helped build this perimeter," his uncle replied, stepping further into the room. "Did you think I did not leave doors open?" The air felt charged, thick with history. I was only beginning to understand. "You were meant to die 3 years ago," his uncle said to me conversationally, as if discussing a minor scheduling error, a loose end tied neatly. "But my nephew here has always had an unfortunate habit of looking too closely." My pulse pounded in my ears. "You orchestrated the blood delay," I said before I could stop myself. He smiled slightly. "Efficiency requires sacrifice." Something shifted beside me then, subtle but seismic, because Adrian's composure did not fracture into rage but condensed into something colder, more final. "You used my father's trust," Adrian said evenly. "I used opportunity," his uncle corrected. "And now you would jeopardize everything for sentiment." "It is not sentiment," Adrian replied softly, and there was something in his tone that made even me inhale sharply. "It is correction." The movement that followed was almost too fast to track, a single suppressed shot echoing in the enclosed space before the uncle's expression even registered surprise. His body collapsing against polished stone flooring with a finality that felt unreal in its quietness. The armed men who had entered with him froze, uncertain. And Adrian did not raise his voice when he addressed them. "It ends here," he said, gaze steady, weapon lowered but unwavering, "or it ends with you." They dropped their weapons. Just like that, silence filled the office, dense and irreversible, and I stared at the man in front of me not as a monster or a savior, but as something infinitely more complicated. Someone who had chosen violence not for dominance, but for closure. And when he finally turned to face me, there was no triumph in his expression, only exhaustion layered beneath resolve. "You are free," he said quietly. The words felt different now. "You can walk out of this building and never look back." "And you?" I asked. "I will restructure," he replied, placing the weapon down on the desk as though it were an object of inconvenience rather than power, "or I will lose everything my father built." I looked at the skyline beyond the glass, the city alive with movement and light, unaware of the shift that had just occurred inside these walls. And I realized that leaving would mean safety in theory, but uncertainty in truth, because the world outside was not clean or simple anymore. "You kidnapped me," I said softly. "Yes, you terrified me. I know, you protected me." A pause. "Yes." The space between us felt different now, not captor and captive, not protector and liability, but two men standing at the edge of a future neither had planned. "If I stay," I said slowly, feeling the weight of my own choice settled into clarity, "it will not be because I owe you." His gaze held mine. "It will be because I believe you can build something better than what you inherited." For the first time since I met him, something unguarded flickered across his face. "That is a dangerous kind of faith," he said quietly. "I work in medicine," I reply, a faint breath of something almost like a smile touching my voice. "I invest in survival." Months later, the skyline looked the same but everything underneath it had shifted. Operations streamlined, street violence reduced, legitimate fronts expanded into healthcare initiatives that bore no public connection to the Vale name. And I stood beside Adrian on the rooftop of the same glass mansion that had once felt like a prison and now felt like a vantage point. The wine cool against my skin as the city light stretched endlessly below. "You could still leave," he said softly, almost habitually. I looked at him, at the man who had once taken me against my will and then given me a choice that reshaped both of us. "I'm not here because I have nowhere else to go," I said. "I know. I'm here because I chose to stay." His hand brushed mine then, not possessive, not urgent, just present, and in that small, deliberate contact was everything we had not rushed, everything we had not forced, everything that had grown slowly in the spaces between danger and decision. The world he came from was still sharp, still ruthless, but it no longer felt directionless. And as I looked out over the city that would never know how close it had come to bleeding itself apart, I understood that love, in its quietest form, is not surrender. It is choosing to remain when walking away would be easier. And this time, I stayed.